Chapter 4. The morning light filtering through the grimy windows of their small apartment was dull and gray, much like the mood Davin had carried with him since the start of his job search. Lira was already gone, no doubt at Jarl's workshop for another long day of wrenching on mechas. She left him a note on the table, as she'd often did. "Don't lose hope. Something will come up. I've seen a few odd jobs posted at the wrench for pilots. Check them out after lunch. L." Davin sighed and tossed the note aside. The thought of returning to the rusted wrench, Ironspire's dingy yet bustling Mecha Bay bar, was both comforting and frustrating. Comforting because it had become a familiar place where he could be surrounded by fellow pilots and mechanics, even if he wasn't technically one of them yet. Frustrating because so far, every lead he had picked up from there had been a dead end. He glanced at his comm device, which blinked with unread job alerts. He wasn't sure he had the energy to sift through another set of listings only to be turned away again. But something gnawed at him, a stubborn refusal to give up. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was desperation, but either way he grabbed his jacket and left the apartment, determined to try again. He returned to the rusty wrench. The familiar hum of the massive mecha bay filled the air as Davin entered the bar. Mixed with the faint smell of engine grease was plasma coolant or alcohol. The wrench, as regulars called it, was more than just a bar. It was a meeting ground, a marketplace for opportunity. Pilots, mechanics, and suppliers all came through here, exchanging stories, tools, and jobs. Davin had seen more than one handshake that sealed a deal on a high-stakes arena match, or a mercenary gig while sitting at the bar nursing a drink. The bar itself sat in the corner of the expansive mecha bay, a gritty hive of activity that never seemed to rest. The ceiling stretched high above, exposing the skeletal support that held the bay together, while massive mecha units were hoisted on platforms around the space, some in various states of repair, others waiting for their next deployment. Pilots sat in clusters, discussing their latest runs, while mechanics swapped parts and stories. Davin found a stool near the far end of the bar, where the glow of neon signs was dimmer, the light from the holo ads flickering lazily. He ordered a drink, the bartender serving his usual underage fizzy beverage, then opened up his comm, scrolling through the job postings while half listening to the nearby conversations. "Word is there's a big job coming through in the next sector. Corporate escort gig. Might be worth looking into. Yeah, if you've got combat experience. They're not looking for rookies." The familiar sting of rejection echoed in Davin's mind, and he felt his hope slipping away again, his finger hovering over the comm screen, about to shut it off, when a gruff voice from behind interrupted his thoughts. "Still looking for work, kid?" Davin turned and found himself face to face with a heavy-set man in a grease-stained flight suit. The man's bushy beard was flecked with gray, and his eyes, sharp despite his worn appearance, flickered with the same no-nonsense attitude that so many in Ironspire carried. "Yeah?" Davin said cautiously. "You offering?" "Could be." The man nodded towards an empty chair, signaling Davin to sit. "Name is Jonas. I run a small salvage operation on the fringes of the sector. We pull scraps and parts from abandoned mining sites and derelict stations. Places most folk don't bother with. My regular pilot's down with an injury, so I need someone to handle the rig for a few weeks." Davin perked up, his heart rate quickening. "What kind of rig?" "Industrial hauler, mostly," Jonas said, pulling up a holo display of the mecha. The image showed a bulky, heavy-duty mech designed for transporting large amounts of material. "Old, but reliable. I don't need a fighter. I need someone who can handle the heavy stuff, but you've got to know your way around tough terrain and make quick decisions when things go sideways." It wasn't glamorous work, nothing like the high-stakes arena matches or the mercenary contracts he had daydreamed about, but it was something. And it was exactly the kind of work Davin had grown up doing on Tessara Prime. Industrial mecha, hauling ore and supplies across rocky landscapes, that was his bread and butter. "I could do that," Davin said, more confidently than he'd felt in days. "I've got plenty of experience with industrial rigs. Worked them back home." Jonas gave him a long look, sizing him up. "Tessara Prime, huh? Tough world. You know how to handle yourself in bad weather? Storms can hit hard out there." "Had to deal with worse than weather back home," Davin replied, thinking of the unpredictable quakes and rock slides that could destroy a hauler in seconds. "Trust me, I've seen my share of rough terrain." Jonas grunted in approval. Good. We'll head out tomorrow at first light. Meet me at Base 6. If you do well, there might be more work down the line, but no slacking off. You screw up, you're out. Understood, Davin said, trying to hide his excitement. Lyra leaned back in her chair, wiping the sweat and grease from her forehead as she glanced at Davin across the small table in their apartment. She was midway through her dinner, a quick meal after a long day at Jarl's, but she couldn't help noticing her brother's newfound energy. "You're looking pretty chipper," she said, raising an eyebrow. "What's up?" "Got a gig," Davin replied, unable to keep the grin off his face. "Salvage work, running industrial rig out of the fringes. It's not combat or anything, but it's a start." Lyra's face lit up with a smile. "That's great. I knew something would come up." "Yeah, I think this is what I needed. Something to get my foot in the door. And it's close to what I did back home, so I'm not walking in blind." He leaned back in his chair, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. "I meet the guy tomorrow morning at Base 6. We'll see how it goes." "You'll do fine," Lyra said confidently, popping another bite of food into her mouth. "Just don't get too comfortable. This is only the first step, right? There's still a whole city out there, and we didn't come all this way just to haul junk forever." Davin laughed. "Yeah, I know. But for now, I'm just happy to have something to do. We'll figure out the rest later." Base 6 was quiet the next morning in the early hours, the massive steel hangar echoing with the hum of distant machinery. Jonas was already there when Davin arrived, leaning against the leg of the hauler mecha with a datapad in hand. The rig itself was a beast, clunky and worn, but built to endure. Its thick legs and reinforced arms told Davin all he needed to know about its purpose. This machine was made for hauling heavy loads across unforgiving terrain. "You ready?" Jonas asked without looking up from the datapad. "Yeah," Davin replied, his nerves bubbling underneath the calm exterior. Jonas handed him the control codes and gestured towards the cockpit. "Get in. We're picking up scrap from an old mining site on the outer edge. Should be an easy run. Just don't wreck my rig." Davin climbed up to the cockpit, his hands shaking slightly as he settled into the seat. It felt familiar, the weight of the controls, the hum of the engine, but there was still a rush of adrenaline that came with piloting something bigger than the small rigs back home. With a flick of a switch, the hauler powered up, its systems coming to life with a low rumble. "Let's see what you can do," Jonas said, his voice crackling through the comms. Davin gripped the controls, feeling the weight of the hauler beneath him as he guided it forward, the heavy limbs responding with surprising ease. The terrain ahead was uneven, cracked earth and loose rocks, but nothing he couldn't handle. As the hauler lumbered forward, Davin allowed himself a moment of pride. This wasn't the high-flying combat mecha he dreamed of, but it was a start. He was finally moving, finally part of something, and for the first time since arriving at Ironspire, he felt like he belonged.